Global Birdfair is almost here. On the 12th, 13th and 14th of July, birders of all types will come together to attend this wonderful event. There'll be talks, demonstrations, wildlife activities and opportunities to connect with other members of our wildlife community. I'll be there all 3 days, and we'll be recording 4 episodes of the Casual Birder podcast from the Wind Chat podcast stage. There'll also be lots of other wildlife and nature podcasts represented there. It's going to be amazing. If you're thinking of coming along, see the episode notes for the link to buy tickets. And do come over and say hi. I'd love to meet you. Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I'm Suzy Buttress. As a casual birder, I take pleasure in watching the wild birds around me, wherever I am. In my show, I share the joy of birding. I tell you about the birds I've seen, speak with experts and enthusiasts, go on bird outings, and I share stories from birders around the world. At last year's Global Birdfair, I was delighted to speak again with naturalist, broadcaster and author Stephen Moss. In a wide-ranging conversation covering the importance of supporting younger members of the wildlife community, recovery from serious illness, and the challenge of individual efforts to mitigate the biodiversity crisis, Stephen provides much food for thought. The interview was recorded in front of a live audience. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me again on the Casual Birder podcast.
Absolute pleasure, Suzy.
Now, we spoke last year and you talked about the passion that you have for birding, how long you've been birding, and also the joy you take in looking at the smaller birds, the birds that we find around us. You've got a series of books that kind of does a biography of individual birds.
That's right, yeah, the robin, the wren, the swallow and the swan, slightly larger bird. And I've just done the owl, but it's actually all 7 British species of owl, including eagle and snowy.
Now, I know you've been doing some coaching for people on nature writing.
Yes, I'm a lecturer, senior lecturer in nature writing and creative writing at Bath Spa University. So we run a 2-year, part-time, very accessible course, which is what we call low residency. So it's mainly online, but we meet 4 times during the 2 years for a few days or a week at a time, and a residential. And it's worked brilliantly. And in fact, quite a few of my former students are here this weekend, which is lovely.
Oh, wonderful. I did have a quick look at the article that's in the Birdfair programme. And you mentioned in there about how nature writing has changed so much over the years.
Yeah, when I was growing up, you asked me how long I'd been birding. It's technically now 60 years. Because I started birding when I was 3 years old, when my mum took me to feed the ducks, and I carried on birding, on and off through primary school. And then on my first day at grammar school, back in the early 70s, I met a friend who's still really dear friend. He's my daughter Daisy's godfather, Daniel, and he's a professor at Sussex, and he and I still go birding together, which is lovely. But when we were birding, he was the only birder I knew through my teens and 20s. And then when I think I was about 29, I went to Israel and got to know another guy, Neil, who was also here yesterday. So there I am at 30 years old, and I literally have 2 birding friends. And that could not be more different from now. If you think about the young people birding today, they're here, they're in big groups. There's, fantastic range of people. They all support each other. They have a far wider range of interests than we did. We were all just birders, bird watchers, I think it was called then. They're interested in other wildlife, but also conservation and ecology and nature in a way I don't think we were.
I think that, the internet has definitely made that accessible. You mentioned about, that was it Daniel that was the only other...
Yeah, my only friend. We didn't have Tinternet in those days, as I say. And it was quite hard. Most birders were older men. They weren't terribly friendly. They weren't unfriendly. They were just a bit... anything about, we've seen Smew, it's a bit like that. And, it just didn't feel like a sort of very sociable or diverse or inclusive or sociable, friendly type of thing.
I think there's still a little bit of that going on. I do hear people tell me, especially people talking in code about the bird. So rather than saying SMEW, they might say whatever the code is for SMEW that I don't know.
I think that's true. And I think, obviously, I'm an older man now, so people often know who I am anyway. But, you notice this, and I've noticed this for years, and it still happens, that if you have a woman birder with her partner who's male but not a birder, male birders tend to ask him what they've seen.
Yeah.
And he'll say, I don't know. She
ask
does.
her.
Yeah, and but it is changing, I think. I mean, of course, there's still issues like that. But, when I first came to Birdfair, which I know was 31 years ago, with my son, David, who was 5, and my friend Neil and his daughter, we literally didn't know anyone else. And we walked around and people were really friendly. And we went away thinking, well, this is nice. And we bumped into a few people we had met, I think, when we'd on our birding in Israel, trip there with Sunbird. So the next year I knew perhaps a dozen more people, and the year after that a lot more. And, for me, that's what kept me going, really, as an outsider, before I suppose I then started writing books and doing TV programmes and became an insider.
That's been my journey too. We've been coming for a few years, and the first year, I didn't know anyone. I talked to a couple of people. This year it's been amazing. I've known so many people, and it just, like you say, it feels like here's our community. There are so many people to meet, so many stories to hear, and it's a wonderful event that it does bring all those people together, and it's friendships that will carry on outside of Birdfair.
Absolutely, and people from all over the world, and I think that is, for me, again, the other fantastic side of Birdfair. As you know, we did This Is Your Life last night, a little bit of a surprise one, the famous Tim Appleton, and everyone who came up said the thing about Tim is he puts people together, he makes them feel included. And that's true of everyone here at Birdfair, all the volunteers, the people behind the scenes, the technical people, the people in the hospitality tents, the people who come and do talks. Everyone is trying to help everyone else. And I think, it feeds back on us in the end, in that if you are nice to people, quite often they then, they'll get books published, or, they'll become more famous than you, and, they'll remember that you were nice to them 20 years ago. I certainly, when I started birding, people like Ian Wallace, I think I wrote a letter to him when I was 13 and he replied. And then I had the privilege of becoming Ian's friend many years later through Birdfair. And, he was a real influence on me. But he was always, right at the end, the last Birdfair he came to, which was the previous 2019 pre-COVID one before he died, he was going up to people and saying, well, where are you from? Children, young adults, people, families, just chatting to them. And afterwards I was saying, he's like the godfather of birding. And they were so surprised because he was such an accessible, lovely man. Yeah,
that makes such a difference to someone starting out, just to feel that there are people interested in them and you're not on your own. So how's been your experience this year of Birdfair? Have you obviously met lots of friends from previous years, but is there anything particular that has stood out, apart from obviously the fantastic This Is Your Life moment for Tim?
I think that will go down into Birdfair legend. My daughter's been here, and she doesn't like birds. Well, she does not like birds. She's not interested in birding, but she loves meeting the people, and it's always great going around with her because she, she'll find new people to chat to, or I'll be chatting to someone and then, she'll join in. And it just, again, feels like part of having different generations here. Seeing the young group yesterday, seeing the people from A Focus on Nature, Rosie and Lou and their team, they're here, and they're a brilliant organisation. It's sort of being rebooted now. And that's an organisation very dear to my heart because I helped found it with Lucy McRobert and Rob Lambert and Pete Gamby about 11 years ago now, although Lucy did all the work and then gave us the credit, which was very kind of her.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, A Focus on Nature, it was Lucy's idea. It's an organisation for young people to network with each other, and it works absolutely brilliantly. It came more or less at the time that social media, things like Facebook, really took on. And people, I remember a young lad saying to me, I thought I was the only birder in my town. And then I turned up and went on Facebook, and there were 5 or 6 of us. So we got together. And a lot of young birders, even now, suffer a little bit from being bullied. And I think also sometimes young people who are a bit different and who are bullied take up an interest in nature, perhaps because they're on their own a lot. And then what's so lovely is those people then meet other people and form a network. And that was, Lucy's original idea, and it's worked brilliantly. But they're a great group of people. I've mentored quite a few young people through that who are now, of course, because it's 12 years on, in their late 30s, 40s, and are working for people like the RSPB and the National Trust and wildlife trusts, and are doing brilliant conservation work. So that's very enjoyable too.
Yeah, definitely finding your community, finding others that share your passions is such an enabling thing. So I remember when we spoke last time, you told me about some of the moments of birding, but I wonder if I could just sort of touch on those again. What in particular has brought you joy, maybe in the last year, of the birding you've done?
Well, what you may not know, and not everyone listening will know, is that last October I felt a bit strange, and it turned out I'd had a stroke. A very small stroke, but nevertheless I was hospitalised, and that made me rethink what I was doing in life generally, and I am genuinely trying to do less, and I am doing less from sort of now onwards. It's been a frantic year. And I suppose, well, firstly, I was forgetting a few words, and I went out birding about 3 weeks later and was terrified that I'd know what everything was but wouldn't remember its name. And it turned out I was okay. I could remember bird names and people's names. And it all came, it started to come back anyway. But I went down to the coast and I did a piece for the Radio 4 Today programme called Winter Walk. And it was about going birding for the first time after a major life-changing experience. And for me, birding has always been there for that. When my mother died, which is now nearly, over 25 years ago, birding and nature and being out there gave me a lot of comfort then, and it still does. We've been through 3 bereavements this year. My mother-in-law, father-in-law and my aunt, who I was very close to, have all died in the last, 2 of them in the last month. And again, birding isn't the panacea for everything, but I find that if I am out birding, it sort of puts things in perspective. And I think and the day after my father-in-law died, jays were arriving in the garden and a kestrel, which we don't normally get. And my wife, who's obviously incredibly shattered by her bereavement, was just watching them and saying, gosh, that's unusual, isn't it? And I thought, gosh, she's able to connect with nature even at this very difficult time. So, yeah, it's been a strange year, put it that way. But birding is always there for me. It's my friend Sean Dooley in Australia once said, people say, where do you go birding? He said, that suggests you have to go and do it somewhere. Whereas he said, no, you're just a birder.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so heartwarming to hear, and I'm so sorry about the bereavements you've been through.
Thank you.
Has your birding then changed over the years?
Oh, gosh, yes. I mean, when I was a young birder, obviously I was trying to see new birds, which I still am, but mostly in Britain, of course. But I wasn't particularly interested in other things. I remember I was on Scilly, probably back in the 80s or early 90s, and I think a monarch butterfly turned up from America. It would have been a wild one. And I didn't bother to go and see it because, it's a butterfly, it's not a bird. Now, from about the millennium, actually, when I was 40, I think I changed then. I was filming with Bill Oddie a lot, and Bill is a really good all-round naturalist. And I think we saw a speckled wood butterfly, and I said, what's that? And he looked at me, it was like, what? It's really common. And we were filming dragonflies at Wick and Fen, and I suddenly got into those 2 groups. I suppose by then I'd seen almost every bird in Britain, common birds, so I started getting into those. But also, obviously, more into environmental issues and conservation, and more into writing about birds, which I really started doing in my 30s. And writing about birds is a way of, and wildlife is a way of, I suppose, relating them to bigger things.
We are in the midst of a bad time with nature. What things can we do individually? Because that always feels a bit overwhelming.
It does. It's a very difficult area because I do a lot. I've got solar panels, I've got air source heat pumps, I've got an electric car because I'm able to afford those things. Not everyone can do that. I've got enough resources to have changed in those ways, which of course you save money in the end, but you don't save money at the beginning. So that's not always something you can do. I still worry about this stress, which the current government do a lot on individual behaviour, because I think it's a way, I'm a bit cynical about this, I think it's a way of stopping them doing anything. And I think there's a real danger with this. I'm not sure what anyone can do about pollution in rivers except do what the wonderful Fergal Sharkey's done and make a really big fuss about it. So he's doing a brilliant job campaigning, but there's nothing he can do himself as an individual to stop pollution. And they're the big thing. Pollution, climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, in that reverse order, are the huge problems. And I do think there's a real issue that if you put it all on individuals, it'll happen too slowly.
Well, the thing is, we can't, as individuals, there's only so much we can do.
Yeah.
And then at a point, you'll think, what's the point?
Yeah. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but it is a paradox. We certainly shouldn't rely on it.
No, yeah.
I think that's the important thing.
I was talking with Hannah Bourne-Taylor yesterday about the Swift brick.
Well, she's done something on her own, hasn't she?
Well, she has, but she also is the first one to say that it's not totally on her own. She's got a network of people that have been doing the research and that have been pushing for this for years, and she just took action.
Yeah.
And it's brought people together.
Well, I have a huge admiration for Hannah and everyone like that. Lucy Lapwing, who was with us on the panel yesterday, Lucy McRobert, of course, my dear friend. These young people, a lot of them young women now, but not exclusively, who are doing wonderful work. And as Hannah, Hannah's really good at mobilising people. Mary Colwell, my old colleague, is really good at mobilising people. They're very open. They're very good at sharing. And I think they often get more done than some of the excellent conservation organisations who I'm members of all of them and I like them all. But I think sometimes, for all sorts of reasons, it takes longer. And someone like Hannah just puts it out there. And with luck, she was let down last week by the Conservative government and the Labour opposition, neither of whom seem terribly interested in this. And yes, it's a small thing, but it's a very easy thing.
Absolutely.
But, if we live in a world where, as far as I know, neither the previous government, Labour and coalition governments, or the 13 years of Conservatives have made house builders put solar panels on new houses. Utterly insane. How much does that add to the cost? It's minuscule. It helps the people who buy the house. They save money and they save energy, and it contributes really well to stopping or limiting the climate crisis. And yet we still live in a world where that is not compulsory.
Yeah.
And I do slightly despair of politicians, not all of them. I do hope, at the risk of being political, I do hope there is a massive change, which hopefully we're at Birdfair now. This Thursday there are 3 by-elections. I hope the Conservatives get absolutely stuffed at them and then go on to get absolutely stuffed at the general election and hopefully cease to exist as a political force, because I think we've had enough of them. But the other parties who have been left in a very difficult position are not perfect either. But I do think most of the others and some Conservative MPs do care and do try, but most of the ones who do try are giving up at the next election.
Yeah, being back at the grassroots level, Hannah mobilising people, then that's meaning, there's Swift groups all around the country that are starting to really push because it's in, the publicity's there, the motivation is there.
And there are some people who've been doing that for years. There's a guy, I can't remember his name, I'm afraid, down in Exeter, who's been doing wonderful work, making Swift boxes and doing stuff, and not perhaps getting the credit that they should. And you're right, she's helping them and promoting them.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And that's just one part, but then there's so many other people, so many other groups that are championing small changes that could be made that will, overall make a difference. So, there is hope there.
Social media is a brilliant thing. It's not always brilliant. It can be terrible, of course. It can, trolling and all sorts of things, which a lot of the young women conservationists get far more than I do. I've had a tiny bit, but very little, actually. And I do think, social media has this, that dark side, but it also has this incredibly positive side and we've seen it massively with river and sewage pollution and farming pollution as well. People are outraged. I think if this had happened 20 years ago, no one would know. So I think that that's the good side of it.
Yeah. So there's plenty of good news out there, and it's important not to feel too overwhelmed by the bad things that happen. We can make changes and we can do things. We're getting near the end of the interview now. What I would like to ask you is, if you had, think of a fantasy birding day. You could be anywhere in the world. You could see any bird you want to see. Could be from any time, just in case there's an extinct bird you would love to see. How would you spend that day?
Oh, gosh. Well, if it was an extinct bird, I've just written my book, 10 Birds That Changed the World, and the dodo is one of the chapters. So, yes, to go back in time and see the dodo or the great auk or the passenger pigeon or all three would be amazing. But if I had to spend a day somewhere, the place I haven't been, I love wetlands. I was brought up near gravel pits. I live on the Somerset Levels. My name's Moss, which means marsh. And I think I would go to the Pantanal in Brazil. And I've been to the Okavango Delta. I've not been to Kakadu in Australia. That's another one. But, yeah, I think seeing hyacinth macaws and jaguars would probably be a pretty cool day. But birding anywhere in the world and anywhere in Britain can be wonderful, is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me again on the Casual Birder podcast. I've really enjoyed speaking.
That's a real pleasure, Suzy, and thanks for all the work you do to put podcasts out. It's wonderful.
In our interview, Stephen made mention of a wish for a change of government, both at the local and national level. The general election of 2024 has now been held, which the Labour Party won. I hope the new government will build the needs of wildlife and nature into its policies, slowing down and reversing the terrible declines we've experienced. If you'd like to hear my previous chat with Stephen, you can find it in episode 113, and the link is in the episode notes. As mentioned, Stephen has written a host of best-selling books about birds, and I highly recommend you check them out. His most recent books are now available: 10 Birds That Changed the World and The Owl, another in his biographies of our favourite species. You can also find a monthly article about birdwatching by Stephen in the Guardian newspaper. My thanks to Oscar Henderson for handling the production of all the podcasts at last year's Global Birdfair, and to Charlie Bingham for her fantastic work in scheduling the guests for interview. If you'd like to support the show's production, you can contribute to the tip jar by buying me a virtual coffee. You'll find the link for that in the episode notes. All of your support, financial or otherwise, is very much appreciated. And I love hearing about your sightings. Tell me about them by leaving a message or a voicemail using the contact form on my website, casualbirder.com. I've started writing blogs of the birding that I do. You can find those accounts, along with accompanying photographs, on my website. You can keep up to date with any new blogs or other news by signing up to receive my emails. And maybe you'd like to join the Casual Birder Bird Club. We meet virtually once a month to share our birding stories, or to watch presentations from special guests. I really love chatting with our wonderful members who join us from around the world. And it doesn't matter your level of birding experience. If you listen to the podcast, you're welcome to attend club nights. In July's Bird Club, we'll be sharing our favourite recent bird photos. I've put a link to the FAQ about the club in the episode notes if you'd like to find out more and sign up. My thanks to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder podcast.